So there I was, sitting down to write the notes for my next YouTube video. And that's when the news comes across my feed. The Capitol is under siege. I opened up live streams and sat there in awe, wondering what was going on. I'd be lying if I said I didn't experience any fear as people broke into the Capitol building. Democracy is kind of like a fragile house of cards. Was this just the beginning of the end? It certainly seemed to remind me of a plot for a movie or a TV show. One which starts out with all things being normal and ends surviving in an apocalypse. So I sat there thinking, what is really going on? Why do these people really believe what they believe? How do I explain this act of outright sedition to my kids? And what can I do to teach them and others how to handle items like this? Hello. I'm Andrew and welcome to the Dad Manual. This is my attempt as a dad, and only a dad, to answer that line of questioning. This is a big topic, and the gravity of what we're talking about will probably make this video a little longer format. To get to the bottom of this, we need to cover a couple different types of topics. Like most things, it would do us well to step back and to take some perspective. And when peeling back the onion, one question we can ask is, what did all of these people who stormed the Capitol building all have in common? Well, I think that question is the simplest. They all believed they were right. The President of the United States had just stood in front of them and told them that they were witnessing the greatest election steal ever, a claim which he had repeated many times over the past couple of months. Over those months, he has brought many court cases forward. He personally has refused to concede. He even just suggested to this very same group that they march down to the Capitol building and demand change. Now, I could point to the idea that just because somebody says something, that doesn't make it true. That would not sway these people. I could point to all the failed legal challenges President Trump's legal team has brought forward, those that have been rejected by both Democrat and Republican judges, some of whom were actually appointed by him. That would still not sway this group. I could point straight to the data and discredit every argument one by one with that data. It still wouldn't matter. None of them would be swayed. These people are never going to be convinced in the legitimacy of that election. Period. Now that we've gotten to the bottom of what they all have in common, we can now start to talk about why. In David McRaney's book, You Are Not So Smart, he explains that while you believe your opinions are the result of years of rational, objective thought, they are actually the result of years of listening to information which confirms what you already believe, while ignoring the information that challenges what you believe. This term is actually known as confirmation bias, or the tendency to take new evidence and use it to confirm your already existing beliefs. An example of this is a commercial I remember seeing. A young woman who thinks autism is caused by vaccines sits down in front of a man who has data from 1,000 different studies on the subject. All but one of those studies showed no possible link. The one study that showed a possible link, she picks up and walks out of the room, ready to get on social media and explain to the world how vaccines cause autism. What this means is that when you start with a personal belief, everything you see confirms that belief, even when it's in direct contradiction. To be clear, there has been no credible evidence of widespread election fraud. Every single time these unsubstantiated claims have been made, they have been disproven. But if all this is true, then why do they still believe this? That's a little more difficult to explain. First, we have to look at how people get and process information. People tend to get a majority of their information from someone other than themselves. This starts with you as a child, getting information from the people that nature programmed you to trust the most, your parents. When information is passed, parents don't only teach their kids what to know, they teach them how to learn and who to trust and what are the criteria in order to develop that trust. This gets reinforced early in life by authority figures like teachers and pastors, scout leaders, and family. Even your friends can make an impact. This is a useful skill to stop yourself from being eaten by a predator. In less dangerous situations, though, this can cause you to have a distrust even when information is given by the trusted individual which isn't correct. It creates a gut instinct or a feeling without any actual data to justify it. This is actually the very definition of prejudice. Having a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. If we apply this reasoning to similar arguments like climate change, it's easy to understand how somebody who doesn't believe in climate change would not see acts of hurricanes as being evidence of something that actually exists. Going back to David McRaney's book, You Are Not So Smart, we can see evidence produced by Ohio State University in which test subjects spent 36% more time reading essays that agreed with their own confirmation bias. Another study from Ohio State in 2009 took clips from the Colbert Report and showed them to people who leaned conservative. Those people's opinions were that Colbert actually meant what he was said and was only pretending to joke. The second part of this deep dive is actually how we process that information once we get it. We have already established that a majority of our information isn't because of our own personal discovery. It's been off of hearsay from trusted sources. If we really think about how information is communicated from one person to another, we will find that people that have less experience and less knowledge of a subject are often the ones who speak in the highest amount of absolutes. They will be definitive about their opinion, even if they've only heard it from a friend of a friend. In this case, absolutes are much more convincing. They don't flip-flop, they're not wishy-washy, they're definitive, they're trustworthy. They give you a sense of immediate direction. This leads to a specific variant of something called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It can broadly be defined as when somebody overestimates their knowledge and or talent on something, considering themselves an expert, when in reality they're unlearned and or just a plain novice on the subject. Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great quote on this, which I will play now.
One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong.
What is stunning about the Dunning-Kruger effect is that people will often retreat when confronted and accuse other people of having to go need to read up on a subject, to go find out what is really going on. In reality, they have not made an objective analysis themselves. They have not read the very items which they say you should go read. The inherent problem with this, when we only believe these trusted sources, is the hearsay takes on a bit of the telephone game as well as a bit of the fish story. It changes slightly over time. It becomes bigger and more grand. Because it comes from somebody that we trust, we believe it. Even when we look at it objectively and realize it's just not possible. At this point, it can be hard to distinguish what is real and what is not real. People who are more learned on a subject matter will often talk in elusive terms, kind of like scientists when they speak of known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. The third reason is the origin of this information. We've already established that these people have been influenced by absolutes and personal testimony rather than data. Their information comes from sites and shows and other people who have done nothing but confirm their own bias and created an echo chamber from which their opinions continually repeated back to them. If you're looking to identify a resource, whether it's an echo chamber or not, take a look at the language used by the site or the host. See if it talks about good and bad and right and wrong. See if the source uses marketing techniques to describe feelings of pain, things that are personal, abrupt, described as immoral, or affect you now. Common tactics are emotional words, camera angles, lighting, and music that sounds like it's from a mystery show, all given before any data is talked about. The more of those exist, the larger the echo chamber, the less reliable the source. Now that we've covered the what, why, and how, it's time to talk about my advice and tips to you kids. I can break these down into a couple recommendations. One is, you probably notice I talk about critical thinking a lot. At home, I like to talk about science and the process of critical thinking and problem solving. Having these talks isn't just a 5-minute talk in a one and done section. It's something that's constantly needing to be reinforced. Another is to use resources that are friendly and challenge you to think harder. Some good resources I like to use to stay inquisitive are It's Okay to Be Smart, Better Than Yesterday, and Because Science. I reference these channels not only because I use them to describe some of my own hypotheses on this subject, but because they bring a lighthearted nature to asking questions and getting the answers as a whole. Sometimes the common ground you have to find is just something that's fun. The next tip is encourage active conversation with others, not to block ourselves off into echo chambers and begin to name call and talk about those people. Instead, we need to debate real public policy with each other. We need to make it okay to have conversations with our neighbors about what our thoughts are. We need not to ostracize others. We need to ensure that they know that we respect them as much as we demand respect ourselves. Next piece of advice is, sometimes you're going to be in conversations you don't want to be in. Instead of ignoring the conversation, it's better to actually get more information out of the person. Phrases like "tell me more" get them to explain where they're coming from. When you ask them a question, don't make it accusatory. Just get them to justify their process of thinking. Get them to walk you through that process. And when you come back and ask the questions about what it means, let that be the answer to them, so they can come to the realization themselves. Nobody likes being told they're wrong. It makes them defensive. You should strive to not tell people what to think. You should strive to teach people how to think. The next step is going to be one of the more difficult ones to have, because there are going to be some things that are told to you in life that you're just going to be absolutely flabbergasted by. You're not going to understand how this person could have just said the words out of their mouth. You may know their reasoning by analogy. They may admit they have no good reason for their beliefs. It's just the way that they believe. In this case, and this case only, it is my opinion that you do have to call them out on what they believe. This is best done not calling somebody directly a name. Instead, defining a word and asking if that is how they associate themselves. For example, I have seen some right-wing YouTube personalities attempt to justify the attack on the Capitol building, stating that it was more in line with what should happen in a democracy than in those protests that happened for the social injustice earlier in 2020. When peeling back the onion on the protests from 2020, those were outcries for social reform. When peeling back the onion on the assault of the Capitol building, that was an outright act of sedition or an attempt to rule others by fear. That is not okay. They are not the same thing. And if somebody supports that, they need to know that by definition, that is what they support. You're not calling somebody a name when you point that out. You don't have to use emotion when you point that out. You do need to stand firm on your ground, though. And lastly, if you have somebody who's open-minded enough to read, I suggest recommending Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People and David McRaney's You Are Not So Smart. Thanks for joining me today, folks. I hope we never see an event again like this storming of the Capitol. I hope I also was able to provide some clarity about the situation. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up or hit the subscribe button. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until next time, I'm Andrew Sherman. This is the Dad Manual. And always remember, failure isn't bad. Failure to try and learn is. Have a good one.